today we're talking about Brian's latest book, Faith After Doubt, Why Your Beliefs Stop Working and What to Do About It, as well as I hope many other things in the time that we have together. And so we just have some people hopping on.
Wonderful.
We welcome you, as always, to our guests in Facebook land. We hope that you will make yourselves known by including comments. Just say hello so we can say hello to you. And we'd love to have your comments, your ideas, your inspirations, your thoughts, your doubts, your hopes today. So join us and bring your comments with you. And Brian, it was thrilling to read Faith After Doubt as we prepare for today. It's quite a journey that you take us on.
Well, thanks. A lot of people have said to me who've read several of my books, they've said, gosh, you really seemed a lot more personal in this book. And I don't think I realized that as I was writing it, but I guess, I told stories from my own life and a lot of people I've met along the way.
It's a very timely title, I think, in terms of the season we find ourselves in. Certainly before COVID, but now during COVID, we are asking big questions on a whole bunch of levels. So it's very timely. I'm going to do a bit of a station identification, Neil, before you jump in. This is Pew and Beyond. It's an initiative of the Spiritual Formation for Discipleship Network of the Anglican Church of Canada. And Neil and I are delighted to have our special guest, Brian Mclaren, with us today.
And we have a number of guests coming on. I see Jeff Free said hello, and Wendy, as always, put your comments in the comment section so we can see you and hear you and hear what's going on with you and have a conversation today. So, when I was reading this book, you take us on a kind of process, a 4-step process: simplicity, complexity, perplexity, and harmony. And I was like, wow, just kind of, it seems to be the journey of so many of us from many different traditions, actually. What kind of sparked it off for you?
Well, I guess I was interested in stage theory from the time I was in college. I think the first theory I was exposed to was actually from the great romantic poet William Blake, who talked about stages of innocence, experience, and then higher innocence or higher experience. And then I think I was exposed to Søren Kierkegaard. He had something called Stages Along Life's Way. But what really helped me, I became a college English teacher, and I went to a professional development thing for faculty where they talked about stages of intellectual development for adolescents, since most of our students were, 18 to 24 years old. And I remember when I sat in that session, I just thought, this is not just helping me as a teacher, this is helping me as a human and as a Christian, because I felt like it was helping me understand how my own spiritual life was unfolding. Then years later, I became a pastor, and I was a pastor for 24 years. And I realized that some of these human development theories could really be useful in helping people deal with challenges in their faith, doubts that they were having. And so I think over the years, I read about a dozen different theorists in some depth and realized that there was a certain kind of pattern. I tried to simplify them and compile them into that 4-stage model. And I should say also, I'm also very cognizant of problems with stage theories, because reality is complicated and life is messy and nobody fits in anybody's schema. And there are ways that people can use stage theories to create a hierarchy. And that's why the metaphor I like to use is not a hierarchy of sort of going up or even going ahead, but the metaphor of building like rings on a tree, that you have an inner ring and then you expand beyond that. And to me, a good analogy is learning math. I think we all knew you first learn counting, and then you learn adding, and then you learn subtracting, and each set of skills builds on the other. So all we're suggesting is that, through the course of our lives, we can either stop learning, like, my math learning stopped at advanced algebra. I never got to calculus. So I've been there my whole life. In fact, I probably regressed a little bit. But in the spiritual life, we would hope that we would keep growing.
Just like to sort of welcome a few people who are here and I see you all hopping on. Do say hello. Put your comments in the section. Just say hi. We'd love to say it back at you. I mean, I think part of what your book names is just, that it's okay to doubt and to express doubts. And that seems to be a really loaded issue for Christians of many traditions. Actually, progressive or conservative, but.
That's really interesting you say that because I think there's this sort of mirroring that people do. We have very conservative Christians who say, if you do not believe this, you are not welcome here. And we only accept people who agree. And, different groups, they might have the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, but many groups have really detailed written lists of belief statements you have to adhere to. And even more insidious sometimes are the unwritten ones that you have to agree to. And so people learn that they're almost walking on eggshells. If I don't make sure I tick all the boxes, I'm in trouble. But there are people, the mirror image, who say, if you believe any of those things, you're not welcome here. And I think one of the challenges that we have is saying, how can we create communities where we display belonging and acceptance and love without making beliefs always our boundary marker? I think one way to say it is it becomes a sort of intellectual circumcision. Do you have the markers on your brain that you belong?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wondering, Brian, before we go a little bit further, can you just sketch out the 4 stages that you've written about, just so folks have a sense of kind of this framework?
Yes. So simplicity, stage 1 is dualism. It's where, and when you think about when we're children, to be raised means to be raised into stage 1. So our parents teach us this is right, this is wrong, this is safe, this is dangerous, these are friends, these are strangers, this is acceptable, this is punishable. So we learn all of those categories, and that's important work. And in fact, it's a matter of life and death to know, do not run out into the street, save your life. So that dualism is the important work of stage 1. And it's our job as children to basically believe what we're told. But of course, even as children, we start having questions, we start challenging. But a lot of people, I think, stay in stage 1 for their whole lives, especially in the religious life, because I think many of us in childhood are given this idea of God, that what God is primarily about is making sure we get our dualism straight. And we know who's insiders and who's outsiders and so on. But a lot of us, by the time we're teenagers, we begin moving out of stage 1 into stage 2. And I call that complexity because now life isn't just as simple as being in 2 categories, us or them, in or out. I remember, I have this very clear memory looking back. Of course, I didn't have this language back then, but I was probably 16, 17 years old. And I went to a youth pastor and I had this theological question. And I said, I don't even remember what the question was. But I was expecting him to tell me this is the right belief and that's the wrong belief. And he said to me, well, Brian, there are 4 different ways to look at that. And good Christians hold each of these different 4 views. And then he told me what they were. And I just remember my mind was blown because I thought, no, everything is either right or wrong. And he was so comfortable and so confident saying, no, good Christians believe these different things. That's the skill you develop in complexity, to see life isn't as simple as one category or another. And then a lot of people stay there their whole lives. I personally think the megachurch is the great example of stage 2 Christianity, because there's not so much talk about, at least in many megachurches, about doctrines and who's in and who's out, because they're interested in having large numbers. They want to be as inclusive as they can. And the focus tends to be on pragmatism rather than dualism, how to have a good marriage, how to raise healthy children, how to, that sort of thing. The how-tos of the faith become very important. And then I think many people get to a point where those easy steps from stage 2 and those easy answers from stage 1 stop working, and they go into what I would call perplexity. And that's the stage where, in a sense, everything is in doubt. And there's a deep suspicion, maybe the pastor who I trusted for many years had an affair and was involved in some corruption or abuse. And suddenly it's like, he said he was from God, and look at what he did. And now the whole thing falls apart. That's often what happens in stage 3. And many people stay there their whole lives. They're somewhat cynical. Many leave the faith when they reach stage 3 because all the stage 1 and stage 2 Christians drive them away because they're not allowed to have questions. And so a lot of people stay there. And then I think more and more people are learning to move into what I call harmony, or stage 4, where we integrate dualism and pragmatism and the skepticism and relativism of stage 3. And we learn to hold both faith and doubt in a kind of creative tension.
For those of you who are wanting to make comments, we're in the Spiritual Formation for Discipleship group for the Anglican Church. Some of you might want to just check us out there. I know a few people have been just saying they're having a slight challenge making comments, but we'd just love to hear your questions. If you're able to make comments, put some thumbs up in for me now so I can just check that you're there. It'll be great. So we've got a lot of people watching today from, got Ruth from Edmonton, Wendy Newman is here, Lynn Uwazens is here, so we've got a nice crowd all with us today. I think this book is so timely. I mean, it's very much of the time we've been in right now, especially, for the last year, the last 4 years, have been very challenging to people, on top of the last year that we've had. I think the pandemic in particular has run us out of easy answers as Christians. We weren't able to, wave this thing away or preach it away. I remember some televangelists rebuking the COVID virus way back in March. And it sort of proved kind of a resistant foe.
Yes.
And I think that challenged a lot of us in our faith and our sense of answers.
Yes. It was interesting. One of my closest friends passed away of COVID last week, and he was sick for 3 weeks and then passed away. And a mutual friend who I hadn't seen for many years called me on the phone and asked if we could pray together for our mutual friend. And my friend on the phone, as he prayed, you could just tell he was like, we've been praying, but Bill keeps getting worse and worse. And I'm not even sure why we're praying, but we're sure hoping this is doing some good. And it was just this very honest prayer that was also, in a sense, it was a prayer that was expressing doubt as well as faith, because people had been praying and he kept getting worse. And I think many times what happened, doubt comes at us at a time that says, somebody told you that if you prayed, or if you prayed the right way, your problems would all be solved. And now, am I allowed to doubt that statement about prayer, and maybe even doubt that understanding of God, without doubting God himself and without doubting my faith itself? So I think very often experiences like this it's like nibbling around the edges, where people start saying, wow, that just didn't work, or wow, that just doesn't make sense. I remember experiencing this because that's a very stage 2 idea. If you can just pray the right way, you'll get success. It'll work. And I was engaged to this woman that I loved, and we broke our engagement. And I just remember thinking, well, I was supposed to be walking in God's will and following, God's leadership, and that sure didn't turn out. And it was my maybe first dipping my toe out of stage 2 to say, maybe life just doesn't make sense sometimes.
One of the things I was sensing as I was reading your book, Brian, was the incredible painful journey that this is, and in thinking about my own growth and sifting through what I believe and what I'm going to question and that kind of thing. Sometimes we can be a little scared of even just questioning. And I'm wondering if you could speak into that a little bit about the fears,
Yeah.
internal fears, but also in peer group fears, particularly if you're in a leadership role, that kind of thing. But yet, as I was reading the book, I didn't feel depressed. I felt encouraged that this is normal, healthy,
Yeah.
and there will be joy in the morning.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Well, Lisa, I'm really glad you bring up this problem of fear, because uh, one of the things I try to do in the book is I give a very, very simple explanation of the, what, how our brains work. That a huge part of our brain is oriented towards safety versus danger. Um, and then another part of our brain is very oriented toward belonging, because we human beings are hive or herd creatures, and we depend on each other. And the belonging groups that we're part of, well, that connects to our sense of survival. So when you take survival and belonging together, and then you overlay faith on top of that, a person starts to have questions about some doctrine of their church, and they think, if I question this, I might get kicked out of my church. They might be praying for me in the prayer group, and that's my first step of being a suspect, you know. Or a priest or a pastor may say, I'm having questions about this. I might lose my job. And so immediately belonging and survival, are threatened. And I just think that helps us understand why doubts are not a trivial thing. They go to the very core of our being. And one of the things, as I was writing the book, that became more and more clear to me is that faith isn't just it's not just something that happens in our head. It's our heads are networked to other people through the Wi-Fi network of language. And so we're part of these communities, and we're connected, and people want to put pressure on us to stay in the group and think like everybody else. And this thing of group think is real. And so doubt challenges all of that. And that's why it very often is one of the most painful experiences of a person's life. I don't want to mention a name here, but last week I was asked to be on a call with 60 members of a religious group that some people would consider a cult. And somebody read Faith After Doubt, and they started spreading it in their group. And so 60 readers got on a Zoom call, and they had to make this promise as we got on the call that nobody would mention this. It was not recorded. And what happens in the Zoom call stays in the Zoom call. But as people started sharing, one person after another would say, if I were to go to the leader of my faith community and tell them that I question this, I would be kicked out of the community. My kids would be kicked out of their school. People wouldn't do business with my business anymore. And I would very possibly have to move to a different city or state and begin my life all over again. So this huge pressure to stay with the company line and say what they're supposed to say and pretend to believe what everyone else believes. And I don't think doubt is the great enemy of faith. I think pretending, dishonesty is the great enemy of faith. And that's where these things, really get complicated.
And I think, it kind of goes both ways. Like, one of the things we're finding in terms of reaching out to people, reaching new people, is not just being able to express our own doubts, but to listen to others. Yeah. It's actually a really crucial part when you think about even the Alpha Course has a question mark as its symbol, right? And then as we forget that, providing these places of asking questions, of expressing doubts, of helping people make the move they're trying to make spiritually, is actually a gift we can really give them.
And because people are so used to, or maybe I should say, so nervous about being judged based on their beliefs. One of the things I think we have to do is find ways to signal to people that I'm not about to judge you. I experienced this, I'll go speak somewhere and there'll be a Q&R session and somebody will say, what do you think about X? And sometimes I can just tell by their question, they know the right answer and they're asking me as the test question. And if I don't say what they want me to say, I am an evil person. In that stage one dualism, this question will tell them which bin to throw me in, right? Well, so many people have had that happen that we have to find a way to signal to people. Uh, and here's the way that I do it. I say to people, I'm really curious. I'd love to know, you know, what you think about this or whatever. And sometimes I'll even say, I'm not going to judge you. There's not a right or wrong answer. I'm really curious. And when people feel that there's genuine curiosity, and it has to be genuine, it creates the very opposite of that feeling of walking on eggshells. It creates a sense of freedom and connection as human beings.
And people are exploring, and I think it's sort of a move. I like your emphasis on the need for clarity versus certainty.
Yes.
I love that. And I think that's a sort of a thing people are playing a lot with, you know, especially those who do get to that point of saying, you know, I just can't do this anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
I can't do this, you know, maybe they've been given a lot of, you know, this like the simplicity, you know, that, but it's just not working for them.
You know, it happens for some people. You know, you're taught we Christians are good and Muslims are bad. You know, so many people are taught that. And then they meet a wonderful Muslim and they think, my Muslim friend is nicer than 90% of my Christian friends. And now they're thinking, what do I do with this? So those dualistic categories don't work. And what do I do? For some people, it's, you know, their church maybe taught them that all gay people are in a certain category, and they meet wonderful gay people and they just think, gosh, this just doesn't work. As you say, it doesn't work for them anymore. And they try to sort of keep the system going, but eventually it just is, it's too exhausting, feels too dishonest. And they actually think, you know, this is making me a worse person. All of this stress and pretense is making me a worse person. And that to me is one of the opportunities, I think, that if more and more of us, especially those of us who are in Christian leadership, can move beyond stage one ourselves and beyond stage two ourselves and into stage three and stage four ourselves, we'll be able to create environments that just feel different. They don't have that test question, you're always on the verge of being kicked out kind of feel.
Picking up on that, Brian, I'm wondering if you could tell us what that looks like in terms of offering opportunities or environments where people can explore doubt and grow and ask questions without worrying about being excluded. And I'll just say, as Anglicans, I think we have a pretty big umbrella, and I think we could settle into offering some real wonderful opportunities for people to ask these questions. But can you share a little bit more about what it looks like?
Yes. Well, let me say, you know, I attend an Episcopal church now. I left the pastorate 16 years ago, and so I've been part of an Episcopal church for all these years. And you're right. There's something, I think it has to do with English history, that when the Church of England, they had Catholics who were separatists, and they had, you know, Puritans and Presbyterians and who were separatists, and they had to, in a sense, create the space for everybody else. So it was this, you know, via media to create space for everybody else. But here's one of our problems. As we move into, you know, a very, very different world than the world of, you know, 17th century England, where so many of these debates were all worked out. We have to figure out what we're actually for. And I think what ends up happening is, oh, we're not going to define your acceptance based on your beliefs, but we maybe will define your acceptance based on your love for organ music, or, you know, praise music, or a certain kind of liturgy. And you know, it's only a matter of time. People are going to say, why do we say that in the liturgy? What does that phrase mean in the creed? And if we create this, and I think one of two things happen. One thing is what I call the conspiracy of ambiguity, where we say, none of us know what we mean by this, and we just don't talk about it. We just sort of go through with it and never think about it. Well, that creates its own kind of unspoken rules. And I think eventually clarity is really going to help us. And what that's going to mean is at the very least, we'll say, when we say the Apostles' Creed, here is what we mean, or here are the 4 different ways you can understand that, to take a cue from my friend who I mentioned earlier, that give people some sense, okay, that's why we're saying this. You know, in the Nicene Creed, the phrase begotten, not made, becomes, you know, it's a big deal in the creed. I'll bet 93% of folks who grew up saying the Nicene Creed have no idea what that phrase means, where it comes from, and they just say it. And maybe that's okay for them, but they invite their neighbor to come to church, and their neighbor's not used to saying things that they don't have some understanding of what they mean. And so this is going to be a place where our congregations, I think, are going to have to become a little more intelligible and clear and honest. Otherwise, we're creating, we're sending all kinds of unintended messages, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can make a point, I think, in your book as well, that sometimes, you know, maybe the thing is not the thing that's the thing. What, you know, when we emphasize whether it's sexuality or biblical inerrancy or, you know, 7-day creation or something like that, we're not actually looking at what the gospel is saying, you know, about social justice, about the financial system, you know, about the way we treat, you know, the widows and orphans, that sort of thing.
Yeah. You know, when I look back, when I was brought up in a stage 1 environment, and, you know, many people still are, and I'm going to guess that many people who show up at an Anglican church in Canada are people who grew up in one of these stage 1 environments, and they sense there's something here that has a little more room, a little more space. So that's what brings them in. But unfortunately, what happens is people are given this very literalistic, simple understanding of the Bible. And when they begin to see problems with it, they just throw the whole thing out. Mm. And what we really, really need is preachers and teachers who can help people see, oh, listen, in the Christian tradition, we didn't used to take things literally. We thought that there were many layers of meaning, and we focused on deeper meanings. We had a lot greater literacy, you know, 1,500 years ago than many people have today. If you look at some of the early teachers of the church, for Origen, for example, he would have thought a literalistic reading of the Bible, he would have just laughed that out of the room, even, you know, in the early centuries of the church. But we need to show the meaning. So you take, for example, you mentioned creationism, and you think as soon as we stop arguing about the literal meaning, as stage 1 people like to do, of Genesis 1, for example, then we start looking at it as a literary text that is full of incredible meaning. And suddenly that meaning just, you know, it's bottomless. It has so many dimensions to it. And then we're in a search for meaning. And for the stage 2 people, then they think, well, how can I interpret this? And how can I see this different meaning? How can I be exposed to different people reading the text from different vantage points? How can I learn about the history of the interpretation? All of that, you know, in complexity, we eat up. Stage 3, we learn to say, how has this text been used to harm people? How has this been used to oppress people? And then we come to stage 4 and we start to say, well, now, how do I put it together again? And what does this say to me and to our world in all of its layers of meaning?
But those are scary questions to ask, because if I'm afraid if I pull out one brick, then the whole thing will collapse.
And that's how a lot of people's faith is constructed, kind of like a Lego set or a brick wall. And I think one of the things we need to realize is that that's a relatively recent idea. You know, for the philosophers among us, we could talk about Rene Descartes and the idea of foundationalism, that we establish indubitable truths or undoubtable or incorrigible axioms. And then we use inductive and deductive logic to structure beliefs, and we create the system where we understand everything. And many people, that's why they go to seminary. They want to get the system where they understand everything. But part of, I think we can sort of say, before the Enlightenment, and people were after that, they looked at faith very differently. And maybe now in a post-Enlightenment context, we're going to look at faith very differently. I remember this hit me once many years ago. I was preaching a sermon. I was preaching through the book of Romans, and I got to Romans chapter 4, and it held up Abraham as the hero of faith. Abraham's held up a couple places as the hero of faith. And I thought, Abraham had no religion. I mean, Judaism came to exist through him. It didn't already exist. He had no doctrines. He had no rituals. He had no practices. What did it mean to hold up Abraham as an example of faith when none of these things that we associate with faith even existed for him? And I just remember as I was getting ready to preach that sermon, I thought, what did it mean for Abraham to have faith?
Just a quick welcome to everybody in our group. And some of you are having a hard time making comments. Just message me. I'll admit you into the page. And so message me to say, hey, I want to say something. So I know some of you are anxious to add some comments into the thing. Lisa, I think you're going to say something.
Curious, Brian, reading through these faith stages, if you think there are any connections with the generational cohorts. I'm a Gen Xer, but I'm wondering about millennials and the Gen Z. Are they starting out with stage one primarily, or is there a lot more distrust and kind of the complexity for those generations?
Yeah. So Lisa, you may know that I work closely with Richard Rohr, Father Richard Rohr at Center for Action and Contemplation. And Richard wrote a book some years ago that I love that has a lot in common with Faith After Doubt, called Falling Upward. And he talks about first half of life and second half of life. And if we were to correlate our two, what I'm saying with these 4 stages and what he's saying with the 2, first half of life is like stage 1 and stage 2. And then the transition is stage 3. And then what he's calling second half of life is what I call stage 4. Well, years ago, I was talking to Richard about this. And I said, Richard, I think that as we go through time, people are ready for stage 3 and 4 at a younger and younger age. And he has since said, yeah, he thinks that's the case too. And there are a couple reasons for it. One is, if 100 years ago, all of our parents were in stage 1, they would raise us to the level where they were. And we probably couldn't even move to stage 2 until we left home and were on our own. Or if we were to move into stage 2, we would have a struggle with our parents. But then let's say that those people grow up, and when they have children, they're in stage 2. They raise their children, and by the time their children are 18, they're probably pretty comfortable in stage 2 because the parents do a good job of raising them to the level where they are. And then maybe those kids grow up and they have kids when they're in stage 3. And so I think there's a certain sense that if we keep moving forward, more and more people will be ready for stage 4 by the time they reach adulthood, because their parents give them an easy entree through those stages. In a sense, they say, you've learned your addition and subtraction. Now you're ready for multiplication and geometry, and then you're ready for trigonometry and so on. And it just, that growth would happen more naturally. But here's the element that can disturb all of this. If the church that the family goes to only allows them to talk as if they were in stage 1 or stage 2, then that in a sense puts a ceiling on where people can grow spiritually. And and then maybe one other thing I'd say about that, Lisa, I think in the last several decades, with a rise in sensitivity about racism and colonialism and feminism and sexism, what this does is, in a sense, it pushes people into stage 3 much more quickly.
Yes.
And I think, and I've had so many youth workers contact me about this 4-stage framework, and they just say, yeah, more and more of our kids are in stage 3 by the time they're halfway through secondary school.
So I got a comment from Wendy. She's just wanted to say thanks for this wonderful conversation. She said they've discussed your ideas in their centering prayer group,
Yes.
and watched your videos on Christianity post-Trump.
Yes.
Very important, I think.
Yes, and when I was asked to give a talk on it's on the internet if anyone's interested, from the Wild Goose Festival. If people look up Wild Goose Festival, they'll find it. And one of the things I talked about there is I said that doubt is not the enemy of faith. Doubt is the enemy of authoritarianism. And and in a sense, what I, as living south of the border from you all, and we hope that you won't build a wall because many of us may need to escape at some point. Uh, but what, in a sense, you can think that conservative religious communities that are very deeply engaged with stage one, they teach people to believe what authority figures say, and they say, don't ask questions, just believe. Well, if religious communities aggregate people like that, and there's some scientific research. In fact, the leader in this field is a Canadian named Bob Altemeyer. He suggests that about 30% of people in every population have a sort of psychological makeup that when they're under stress, they find great relief from an authoritarian leader. And so if you think religious communities aggregate these, then all an authoritarian has to do is win the leaders of these religious communities over, and then they will transfer all of their followers to that leader. Well, that explains an awful lot of what people have been seeing, not just here in the United States, but similar things have happened in Philippines, and there's similar movements across Europe. And so this is not just it's not just an American problem, and it's not even just a Christian problem, because this maybe will help us understand what's happened in sectors of Islam in parts of the world too. So this is a human problem at the end of the day. And that's why the dynamic between faith and doubt, between trust and independent critical thinking is, I believe, part of the human condition. And there are multiple ways that we can malfunction.
Yeah, right, yes. Andrew Stevens Randy from Rossland, BC, he's got a question. He goes, how can parts of the church be receptive to and better accompany people who are in some phase of deconstruction/reconstruction?
Yeah. Well, one of my recommendations to priests and pastors is to say, think of yourself as having 4 congregations in the same building. And so think of yourself as saying, when I'm preparing this sermon, I've got people in simplicity. All they're looking for is for me to tell them what's right and wrong. All they're looking for is for me to tell them what is true and trustworthy and what they should not believe. So how can I give the stage 1 people something to help them in that way this Sunday? But I don't want to leave everybody there. And that's all that a lot of preachers do. The stage 2 people, they want to know history. They want to know background. They want to know information. Stage 2 people love to hear about Greek words, and they love to hear about historical background because they want more information. So how can I be sure that I have some of that in this sermon this week? And the stage 3 people, they're suspicious. They're really suspicious about abuses of power. How can I acknowledge how ideas from this text that I'm preaching could be abused and have been abused to harm people? And how can and stage 3 people are very oriented toward issues of justice because they see abuses of power. How can I make sure that I hit those issues clearly and strongly? And stage 4 people, they know that what really matters is love. And they know that what really matters is humility in the face of beauties and mysteries beyond our ability to understand. How can I be sure to offer something to them? And that might seem like an impossible task in one sermon, but I think we'll all be better preachers if we do that, because here's the problem. If all of our sermons are aimed at stage 1, or maybe a little at stage 2, all of those other people are going to think, this just doesn't speak to me. they don't speak my language. This isn't for me. And that's, I think we need to thicken our appeal and thicken our sensitivity to where people are.
And Michelle says, do you suppose that one of the reasons so many people have left the church and become cynical about it is because they're in stage 3 and the church is trying to keep them in stage 1 or 2?
Exactly.
And therefore, there's no one to help them put it back together again.
Exactly right.
Mm.
And to make matters worse, if a person expresses a stage 3 question or doubt, and you know, I want to say, when a stage 3 person expresses a question or doubt, they are doing their job. They're doing the work of their stage of human development every bit as much as the stage 1 person who's trying to figure out what's right and wrong. It's the job of stage 3 people. It's the work of stage 3 people to raise those challenging and difficult questions. And if they're jumped on, the Bible says it, you know, I believe it, that settles it. You know, that's just a message to the stage 3 person: you're not welcome here. I have a memory. Of course, this is again before I had any of this language, but we had just started a new congregation, and I was a young pastor, and we were having a Bible study. And there was a woman in the Bible study. I'll never forget her. The first time she introduced herself to me, she came to our church and she said, "I just served for 4 years in the Peace Corps. My life, I was hoping that would give meaning to my life, but my life has no meaning. And I'm looking for meaning. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'm going to commit suicide." I mean, that's how she introduced herself to me. She was intense and she was honest and she wanted no BS. And we worked hard to help her know she was welcome in our congregation. And she eventually, you know, came to faith and so on. But she was in this sort of in between stage. And and somebody was in our group who was pontificating what I would now call, you know, arrogant stage 1, uh, you know it all kind of talk. And I remember I realized, if I let him talk for one more minute without being challenged, she's going to get up and walk out. And I have to make a decision. Would I rather lose someone like him or someone like her? So I interrupted the guy and I said, "Listen, I just need you to know, I understand you look at it that way. Not all of us in this room do. And I want to show respect to everybody who's here. So let's move on to somebody else." And that was my way of making sure that it was a safe zone for a person in stage 3. She was a stage 3 seeker. She'd seen through so much, and she was worried that there was nothing, no meaning anywhere. She was looking for something to give her life meaning and hope.
Mm.
A great story. Wow. And great modeling for kind of the how. And I was just thinking, and maybe this is too huge a leap for us to make, but there does seem to be a lot of desolation, depression, a search for meaning, especially now with COVID. And I'm wondering if we as church have a real evangelistic opportunity, even to be able to step in and help folks sort through that stuff, and make their faith their own, and find value, I guess, in that.
So here's where maybe this little tool of 4 stages could help people think about a variety of problems, because if these are about human development and not just about religious development. So we have people in our churches who have a theological problem with this. They were given, if you pray right, you won't be sick. If you claim something in Jesus' name, it will be done. And, you know, look, let me just say it. That's BS. That's just not true. It just is not true. Good people pray to get healed from COVID and they die, and terrible people get COVID and they get better, right? So you know, that sort of simplistic view of the world is not true. You can find Bible verses that make it sound true, and preachers preach those Bible verses, and people think, I'm obligated to see the world this way. What those preachers don't tell them is there are other Bible passages that argue with those Bible passages. The book of Job being a great example. You have people making all these simplistic statements all through the book of Job, Job's friends explaining why he's so sick and miserable. And at the end, God shows up and says, the only person here who's said the truth about me is Job. And all he did is get mad about the way things are and refuse to accept your stupid, easy answers. You know, God takes the side of the stage 3 doubter in the book of Job. So there are religious people who need liberation, but I think we can see that there are people who have nothing to do with religion right now, who are also going through their kind of stage 3 crisis. They thought that governments would give them the truth. They thought that the economy would provide security for them. And this is why at the end of the book, I have a chapter called The Civilization in Doubt, because one of the things we're realizing is that our governments are not succeeding in helping us deal with our most pressing problems. You know, COVID is in a sense the warm up for the real challenge that we have, which is global climate change. And our governments are just failing. And other people think, well, it's the economy that will help us. Well, guess what? Our economy is like an automobile with an accelerator and no brakes. We don't know how to stop sucking resources out of the environment. We don't know how to stop pumping toxins into the environment. And so so people are saying everything that gives my life shape and meaning is falling apart and is disappointing. And for those folks, here's a chance for us to say, let's create a community where we don't have all the answers, but we're all at least admitting that our current answers aren't sufficient. Let's be seekers together. That's to me, a very attractive, I think that could be a very attractive kind of community for people. Now, look, it might be impossible for a priest to keep doing what he's doing at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning and help these people. But listen, our many congregations are learning that we're in multiple lines of business. In fact, we've learned it with COVID. We can have in-person meetings and we can have virtual meetings. That's 2 lines of business. We can have a dinner church. We can have a discussion group, a pub group on Thursday nights. There are 1,000 different things we can do that are all part of our ministry to help people make meaningful contact with the good news of Jesus Christ, and to do it in a way that's honest and authentic to who they are.
I got a question from Astrid. She goes, can someone be in several stages at the same time, depending on the circumstances or the environment or who they're with?
I think that's so true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, especially if you think of it like this, if you've learned stage 1, and then you become stage 2, if you go back to a stage 1 environment, you can be bilingual. You know how to play the game. You learn the rules of that game. And now you've learned the rules of some other games, and you can fit in different settings. And many of us, we are in so many different settings that we just sort of, without even thinking about it, we learn how to play by the rules of all of these different settings. That's actually one of the primary skills that people learn in stage 2. Now, when people get into stage 3, they tend to not like playing those games. In other words, they just want to be who they are, and they're a little bit annoyed that anybody expects them to be anything else. And in fact, they might even feel dishonest when they play by somebody else's rules. But I think that's a very insightful question. And I think in a sense, all of us have these capacities in us, and they're just more or less habitual, more or less developed.
Sometimes it's when faith hits up with life, isn't it? You know, that structure that I've held on to and life collide. Yeah. Jeffrey Mackey up in the UGOD says, I'm wondering how the stages might relate to the previously unchurched. I know some new Christians who don't have the history or residue of past church debates. In Anglicanism, at least, I believe they have come into a more open church than what I grew up in. Yeah. So what about the previously unchurched in the stages?
Yeah, so, you know, my favorite theorist is a fellow named William Perry, who, and he's not working in the world of religion at all. People in the religious setting often study James Fowler, Lawrence Kohlberg, Nicholas Slee. There's just a number of great religious and Christian, you know, theorists and teachers in this area. But here's what I think is the reality. We have a lot of stage 1 secular people. And in fact, those of you in Canada who watched what happened here in the US on January 6th, you can pretty much bet that the people who were storming the Capitol were stage 1 religious people and stage 1 secular people. Because what happens is when you don't have God to give you a shape to your stage 1 desire for simplicity and good guys and bad guys, you choose a political ideology. And so there's a lot of folks in stage 1. And what will typically happen is a person in stage 1 will find, if they're not a Christian and they want to become a Christian, one of 2 things will happen. They'll either find a stage 1 church that now, since it's a lateral transfer, they go from being a secular stage 1 person to a religious stage 1 person. And now it's going to be a certain form of Christianity that gives their life meaning rather than a certain political party. And maybe they'll be lucky enough to put those two together. And then we're really in trouble, because then with stage one certainty, their politics and their religion are fused, right? There's a lot of people like that. But something else might happen for a stage one secular person is they come in contact with a stage 2 or 3 Christian community, and they sense these people have something going on that's beyond anything I have. And I'd like to get what they have. And very often that becomes a way that we welcome people in. Their coming into our congregation becomes a chance for them to grow into their own next stage of development. And hopefully our congregation will be a place where they can continue to grow through the whole life cycle.
Astrid wants to know how we can encourage others to sort of figure out what stage they're at.
I think there are ways that this can be taught to a group of people to make it to be no judgment. And maybe the example I could give is karate. If a student goes to study karate, they don't feel embarrassed for not being a black belt already. They go in, and I forget what the first belt is. Let's say it's green. I can't remember, but they go in and they're a green belt, and they think, oh, this is where I belong. I'm a beginner. But they also know, but here's the next one, and here's the next one. And I think there's a sense we can help people say, look, wherever you start, we want to help you grow. We want to help you first learn right versus wrong. Then we want to help you learn wise versus unwise. Then we want to help you learn just versus unjust. And then we want to help you learn loving and how to be loving to everyone. And somebody thinks, okay, well, I know what my job is, my goodness, we'd be in a better position if we could learn something from the karate community.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's so many examples of this. You want to be a nurse, and you're going to have anatomy and physiology, and they just want you to memorize the names of all of these tissues and organs, and you realize this isn't what it's all about. This is just the beginning stuff. It's really hard beginning stuff, but I can't learn the more advanced things until I at least know the names of things. And in Buddhism, they call this the beginner's mind. And one of our terrible problems is the way we've done Christianity, especially in Protestantism, is we've all been competing with each other for market share of the Protestant community. And so we say, here's the set of beliefs. And once you're in our group, you have arrived. In a sense, we give people the opposite of a beginner's mind. And this is, I think, a deep change for the way we do spiritual formation.
Yeah, actually, Lynn makes a point about that. She goes, I struggle with the question about how we let our community know that we're not preaching what the fundamentalist church down the road preaches without appearing to be in competition or dissing another congregation.
I think there's a way that Anglicans and anyone could do this. I think we could just say, our church is not for everybody. We want to explain who we're for. We're not for everybody. If you're looking for a church that tells you what to think and that believes that every question has a simple answer, that is definitely not us. There are many churches down the road who will be a good place for you. But if you're looking for a place that's going to put you on a path of lifelong growth, and part of that growth is going to be growth in humility, where you're going to realize that there's a lot you don't know, that's the kind of place, in fact, it's wonderful if a priest can say, that's the kind of Christian I'm learning how to be. And if that's the path you want to be on, you're welcome to be on that path too.
Brian, I can't let you go without connecting again about the political scene. And we talked a little bit yesterday in our preparation about some of the voices that are really strong from Christian churches that are more stage one in terms of kind of easy answers. And it's really hard as someone who's in the perplexity and certainly in the harmony kind of stage to get arrested, to get news, to have a voice in our neighborhoods, in our communities, particularly around really serious social issues. Yes. It just seems like the sensational stuff goes, viral, yes. And we find it really hard to be able to step into that sphere of having a voice there.
Well, let me, I know our time is very limited and such a good question. So let me try to give a very concise answer that people maybe can unpack when we're done. Jesus was not a Christian. Jesus was a Jew. And Jesus' primary opponents were the scribes and the Pharisees. So Jesus was not afraid of differentiating himself from them. He didn't hate them, but he also didn't approve of them. And he wasn't afraid to differ. He was willing to explain who he was by his difference to them. And I think that's a perennial reality. I don't think that's being divisive. I think there's a way to do it with love and with humility, but it takes courage. It takes courage to say, we are different. That's not what we're about. We see things differently. And we might not be able to define it very well yet. We better learn how to define it. In fact, I think we need to be able to say, for example, on issues of, there's very simplistic ways of reading the Bible. I think more and more of us need to say, we love the Bible too much to take it literally. We have too much respect for the Bible to take the Bible literally. We love God. We love God too much to turn God into a big white guy in the sky. Our love for God will not allow us to treat God as if God is a dictator. We think God is way better than that. And those are ways that I think we can graciously but clearly define an alternative, because the people who need an alternative, they need us. Yeah.
They do. And some of them are here today. Linda says, she just wants to say, what you're saying gives me hope that there's room for me in the church. I'm a cradle Anglican who often feels lonely where church is connected. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. It's carving out that space is so important. And that is how often you have that sense of people who are feeling lonely in church, and that's why. Well, we are out of time. Time has flown.
Neil, I'm wondering if we could showcase Brian's book again. And I wanted to remind folks, it's not only a really fabulous read, but there's great questions after the end of each chapter. If you want to do it as a book club, I know we're all stuck on Zoom right now with kind of winter weather still, or a summer book club on the back deck somewhere. It's a great opportunity to explore this together and maybe invite some of your friends and really go deep. Thank you so much, Brian, for just your gracious gift today of sharing so much with us and really helping the church to grow and to see where we can find our place in a culture that's vastly changing. Yeah.
Well, I've loved being with you. Keep up the great work. Podcasts like this are helping so many people eavesdrop on conversations that give them hope that there's room for them, just as this woman said a minute ago. So thank you very much.
And I think it's helping us carve out the new space we need to create, that's really needed now. Yeah. And so thank you very much. So this has been Pew and Beyond. Who are we, Lisa?
It's Pew and Beyond is an initiative of the Spiritual Formation for Discipleship Network of the Anglican Church of Canada. And who do we have on next week, Neil?
We have Janet Marshall, who is the Director of Congregational Development for the Anglican Diocese of Toronto. And she has inspired a lot of us in many different ways, inspired me in this work, and I'm really excited about having a conversation with her. And that'll be tomorrow, next week, same time, same place. And everyone is saying thank you, Lisa, Neil, Lisa, and Brian. So thank you all for being here and bearing with us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Peace, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.